Why is Bread and Roses important to Philadelphia?
Bread and Roses is super important to Philadelphia. It's like the only funder for social justice work in the region. Like, it's critical that there's a place for people to come together, pool their resources, and fund really important social change work.
Well, I mean, it's the progressive United Way. This is, where you throw the money together and start projects that you wouldn't have time to figure out about on your own.
I first got involved more than 20 years ago, and I was on the board of one of the grantee groups, and they needed somebody to come and represent, one of our funders. And I came, and it was the most diverse setting I'd ever been in, racially, age, LGBT, all of that. And so I slowly got involved with the Tribute to Change and fundraising in various ways, and I got on the community grant making group. So it's so important for activists. Activists need the funding. But it was my training ground for how I've lived my life and how I've gotten involved in social change philanthropy. I currently work for the government, with credit unions. I focus on access to capital for underserved communities, and that would not have happened if I hadn't gotten involved with Bread and Roses Community Fund. No way.
Its history of change, encouraging groups to change, is really still important. And, people need to remember that history. We're trying to change, not charity. For me, it still works.
I believe and strongly that Bread and Roses, it hits where it matters the most, which is the community, the heart of Philadelphia. And then when it comes to funding, when it comes to funding, it's like a lot of times you go into a nonprofit, but they actually acknowledge the people that's on the ground, the grassroots. That's so important. That's really making the change in the forefront of things.
I think it is the only multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-income organization in the city.
Important to Philadelphia, important to me because it funds the groups and people who are doing the most progressive work in the city. It does it on a broad-based scale, and I think without Bread and Roses, a lot of community organizations and progressive movements simply wouldn't have the funds to do the kind of important work.
Bread and Roses throughout its history has always, based on its relationships in the community, been able to connect to new and emerging organizations who are working on a variety of different issues. So there's a lot of things that have been supported in Philadelphia and in the region, where Bread and Roses was the first funder to support those things. I think it has sort of an interesting capacity to be a funder, but also to have very deep relationships and roots in the community. I think that people in the community think of it as a community resource and are very respectful.
Oh, it was a lifesaver. I founded the Darfur Alert Coalition in 2004, a good 10 years ago, and we were just launching our organization, and Bread and Roses granted us money to get started, and it meant a great deal.
Bread and Roses has contact with an awful lot of neighborhood groups or community groups that are doing significant and important work that most of us do not know about. And the work is really directed towards causes that many of us are supportive of. But because we don't know of them, we have no way of contributing to them. So therefore, using Bread and Roses as a conduit for our support is very helpful.
Bread and Roses is important for Philadelphia because it funds a lot of organizations that otherwise would get no support that are so valuable in terms of creating grassroots social justice change.
They're the one and only, right? So there are some organizations that are not going to be funded by any other place. And those are the organizations that I care about. And so I want to support Bread and Roses so that those organizations can be well funded and do the work that they need to do.
Bread and Roses is the last grantor to true nonprofit organizing activism in Philadelphia, and truly around the country there are not many organizations like Bread and Roses. So we let organizations like Disabled in Action, the organization that I work with, be able to do activism and advocacy that things like Decarcerate, Mia Leah with the One Love can truly do, and not have to look for the conglomerate corporate money.
Now, what would each of you say is the most important social justice issue facing Philadelphia today?
Well, you mean besides widespread poverty that completely cripples people's ability to live and do some life, besides that overarching? Is that
You know, I've been hearing a lot about the decline of our school system, our public school system. I'm a product of the Bronx public school system, and you know, we made it through just fine. And I'm an advocate, but I don't know that I would feel comfortable sending my child to public school these days. I mean, what's going on with it is really scary. So I'm very impressed with the groups that are still battling for the budget and the kids who are out there saying, you know, we need better quality education. So I think it's very serious because it really speaks to how are we preparing the activists of tomorrow, you know.
The more inequality we tolerate in society, the worse everyone does, but the much, much worse the people living in forced living poverty do. And we have created an economy and a culture that is expanding inequality when what we should be doing, what other civilized nations do, is to try to control inequality and diminish it.
I personally am thinking a lot about the criminal justice system and mass incarceration, and also education. So I think those two things, and there are those connections between the two. There are those that will articulate an analysis that says the school systems in their current state are only preparing young people to go to jail. So it's like the school to prison pipeline. So I think we really need to be thinking creatively about restorative justice and other ways of working with young people, those that are currently incarcerated.
The idea that 500,000 people in Pennsylvania and many in Philly are not getting Medicaid expansion is really discouraging. The schools are so bad right now that I just have so little hope unless the community raises up in real fury. I mean, not just 1,000, but 10,000 people. It's not going to change. It's really scary, and it's just going to perpetuate the inequality very severely.
It's just crazy how like now our fund is isolated for building more prison and closing down more school. And what's that? It set a tone for our futures of leaders of tomorrow. Our youth of today is like being set up to be in prison. You know, specific people of color.
Poverty. It permeates into all of the rest of our issues. You know, there's the economic equality that we have in this country, in this city. It permeates through all of our lives, and not only Philadelphia, but countrywide, worldwide. The poverty that a few are pushing us into is what organizations like Glenn and Roses allow a few of us to fight back that power.
The massive underfunding of this public school system.
Why is that the case?
It's atrocious. It's ruining the future for hundreds of thousands of kids. That's the future of the city.
I'm a 5-year-old, so I've been thinking a lot about schools, and I feel really strongly that the situation that's happening with the Philadelphia School District, we should be talking about it in terms of a human rights abuse, and that
why do you say abuse?
I think that everyone has choices, and so I think that we're making choices about where we spend our money. I don't buy the idea that there's not enough money to go around. I think there's plenty of money to go around. I just think we're choosing to not prioritize our children and the future of Philadelphia. And so to me that feels key, and everything else is secondary.
I've had a chance to work in the prisons. I've had a chance to work with young people, juveniles who are incarcerated, and it's, from my point of view, it's the, what should we say, concentration camps in America. It's like the Germans were going about our business and not paying attention to the fact that there's millions of people suffering within arm's reach, and it's a system that can be changed, and Glenn and Roses is funding it.
Just overall, the city's commitment to doing things that are really going to help the lowest income people, whether that's about affordable housing or quality public education or like accessible, decent transportation, like all the things that people need to like lead great lives. Like that overall is kind of the most important issue for me.
Well, poverty is certainly an issue, and one subset of that is that there are a lot of people who are poor, as well as people who are in poor communities and communities of color who are incarcerated. at massive rates now, more so than ever before. And that then results in people having difficulty finding jobs afterwards and they're leading kind of productive lives because the stigma attached to them, as well as legal and other barriers prevent them from living full lives.
I actually think it's economic. There are a lot of issues. There's race, continue to be police issues, prison issues, but I think economics, the divide between those who have nothing and those who have a lot is reflected here, and whether we address it in terms of minimum wage or living wage, I think that's really the next critical movement in the city.
And why do you say, you work with so many social justice issues, why do you say that one's the one that's
it's interesting because that's not an issue that I can work on legally. There aren't legal answers to that one. We work on a lot of police abuse issues and criminal justice issues, all of which are important. But I really think as important as they are, this last 20 years of the 1% and the rest of us is really a threat to really a fair society in a way that's much deeper than some of the criminal justice issues.
In 1975, Senator Frank Church said this on Meet the Press. Remember, this is 1975. In the need to develop a capacity to know what potential enemies are doing, the U.S. government has perfected a technological capability that enables us to monitor the messages that go through the air. Now, that is necessary and important to the United States as we look abroad at enemies and potential enemies. We must know, at the same time, that capability at any time could be turned around on the American people, and no American would have any privacy left, such as the capability to monitor everything. Telephone conversations, telegrams, it doesn't matter. There would be nowhere to hide. He goes on to say, I know the capacity that is there to make tyranny total in America. And we must see to it that this agency, which he doesn't name, incidentally, but we know what it is now, and all agencies that possess this technology operate within the law and under proper supervision so that we never cross over that abyss. That is the abyss from which there is no return. Unfortunately, today, far more attention has been paid to the personality and motives of Edward Snowden than to the vast overreach by the U.S. government that Frank Church warned us of. Meanwhile, as we're gathering here tonight, meaningful reforms to the NSA's activities are slipping from our grasp. Are Senator Church's fears becoming a reality? I believe the lesson here is that no matter how brave and righteous a person's actions are, there also needs to be others who get involved from a broader, engaged citizenry in order to ensure that those acts are successful. Each of the awardees here tonight has blown the whistle on injustice and have demonstrated leadership that demands our attention and support. Let's learn more about tonight's honorees, whose lives and work embody our theme of conscience and freedom. Please direct your attention to the screen to watch a short film featuring this year's honorees.
Conscience. 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 Freedom. Freedom. Freedom.
Conscience
and freedom.
Conscience and freedom.
When thinking about getting this award and how it made me feel, I can tell you that the first thing that came to mind is incredibly uncomfortable. I really think that my very best work has always happened in coalition and collaboration with others. I also just really want to say thank you to Bread and Roses because it's a huge honor to be recognized by them. I think they're just a real catalyst for change. I mean, they're a convener and they really do know how to fund very difficult issue areas and bring people together to figure out a way of having a larger impact than each individual organization or individuals put together. I just think Bread and Roses rocks.
What we were trying to do is do our little part to protect that essential element of freedom, which is the ability to, the ability to dissent.
Well, I'm very honored also to be named in a very long tradition of activism, speaking truth to power. In many cases, those individuals who went before us paid a huge personal price for that. And I think it's a great honor for the two of us who went into that action really just thinking of ourselves as regular concerned citizens who were protecting democracy.
So receiving the Robeson Award is a mixed thing for me. I'm honored. I think of names of people who passed away at an early age, or in the case of Bill, he just died last fall, and it's really a shame he's not here, because if anyone deserves an award, it certainly is Bill. So it's kind of bittersweet.
Well, there's a great difference between those foundations and groups who basically operate under the model of charity, taking care of people who need to be taken care of, and offering them things that they can't get for themselves. There's a huge difference between that model and what Bread and Roses does, because Bread and Roses is about change. Bread and Roses is about the exercise of power, about the pursuit of justice.
And I love the fact that it's a joining together of donors and activists, which is not always easy to do. And I like the fact that they look for grassroots organizations and activities to strengthen and empower those grassroots activities to become, hopefully, part of a movement that will continue to the future.
To be recognized with all of these other people, and also in a community that has worked for so much change over many years. We just feel an incredible amount of solidarity from allies and family and friends that we've developed over this time, and it feels really humbling to be receiving this for One Love. Bread and Roses has incredible and holds incredible relationships with a lot of people doing activism and organizing and social justice movement building, and is able to tie a lot of those people together in our Philadelphia community, which is really special.
Well, first and foremost, I'm honored that Bread and Roses would consider the work that we do.
Something that awards do is both a gift and an obligation to sort of hold you accountable to embodying that thing that you're being awarded for, so that it sort of keeps us on task to actually be working toward community empowerment in a very public and transparent way, and also I think is a responsibility of that public to then support that work. That Decarcerate has always had this saying that everyone benefits from ending mass incarceration, and everyone has a role to play in that struggle, and I think this award is a nice chance to amplify the echo of that thing that is both a claim and a call for support.
People need to understand what Bread and Roses does. It, in fact, funds those organizations, groups, or whatever the case may be, that are about systematic change.
Part of our work has been to really be critical of philanthropy. So it's a little odd that we're receiving an award for being philanthropists. We had a really complex kind of reaction to getting the award, both because we were excited, but we felt like, does that mean that people see us as philanthropists? Or is that because we've done a good job of being critical of the way philanthropy works?
One thing that I find really exciting about Bread and Roses is that folks that are engaged in on-the-ground work have a voice in saying where the money goes. That's something that we've been talking about as Resource Generation, how to fund responsibly. And one of the answers that we really like is to let people who are doing the work on the ground make those decisions.
freedom is only an illusion when so few people control so many of the resources, and that's why we're explicitly trying to redistribute wealth in this country.
Bryan for being with us tonight and for making the connection between the brave act that the Citizens Commission took in 1971 and the work we still have to do today. So thank you very much.
Good evening, my name is Leah Pillsbury and I'm on the planning committee for this year's Tribute to Change. To answer the question that Resource Generation members asked in the video, yes, you are receiving the award, both because you're doing good work as philanthropists for social change, and also because you're being critics of how philanthropy works. Resource Generation, or RG for short, is a national organization whose mission is to organize young people with wealth and class privilege to become transformative leaders working towards the equitable distribution of wealth, land, and power. The Philadelphia chapter of RG recently began a series of conversations around one question: how can we use our collective resources, financial or otherwise, to shift the balance of power in Philadelphia? This is a question we should all be asking ourselves. RG Philly has continued to explore this question and has started to disseminate these ideas. Last September, RG Philly members wrote a public letter critiquing the role of philanthropy in public education. It was published widely. RG Philly members are also beginning to explore more accountable ways to give money through cross-class giving circles. Thank you for your work in the past and the good work that's going to come. I'm so pleased to present the 2014 Robin Hood Was Right Award to the Resource Generation Philadelphia
Decarcerate Pennsylvania is a coalition that formed in 2011 to challenge the expansion of Pennsylvania's prison system amid drastic cuts to vital social services. The ACLU of Pennsylvania is proud to be a part of that coalition. Since forming, Decarcerate's three-point platform, demanding no new prisons, decarceration, and community reinvestment in education, housing, reentry, and healthcare, has been endorsed by more than 100 organizations across the state. Decarcerate has had letters and opinion pieces published in the state's largest newspapers. Decarcerate members have debated Secretary of Corrections John Wetzel on WHYY. Social media campaigns have engaged thousands on Facebook and Twitter, and if you can't engage thousands on Facebook and Twitter, then you're not doing it right. And a weekly radio show on WPEB 88.1 FM has engaged local audiences. As active as Decarcerate has been in the media, they've been even stronger in the streets. They've led protests and rallies all across the state, at the headquarters of prison profiteering corporations, the Department of Corrections, the state capitol, and throughout Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, I would say. In November 2012, in an act of civil disobedience, 7 Decarcerate members temporarily halted prison construction at the site of SCI Graterford. In May 2013, Decarcerate organized the March for a People's Budget, a 10-day 113-mile, editorial comment, very hot march, from what I hear, very hot march, from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. Decarcerate continues to grow in strength and numbers and as an important voice for community empowerment. It is indeed my honor to present the 2014 Community Empowerment Award to Decarcerate Pennsylvania.
Melia Kiernan is one of the founders of One Love movement. In 2010, the Philadelphia Cambodian community was hit with a detention and deportation crisis that targeted refugees with criminal records. Amidst the agony of families being torn apart and a traumatized community facing yet further government-inflicted trauma, Melia helped build One Love into a movement grounded in a belief in the transformative power of love, redemption, and second chances. Melia and One Love challenge immigration reform frameworks that divide migrants into desirable and undesirable migrants. They call out U.S. policies and militarism that uproot people from their beloved homelands in the first place. Melia and One Love make the link between the mass incarceration crisis and the mass deportation crisis, making alliances with communities that are devastated by the same forces of structural violence. Melia is equal parts ferocity and compassion, courage and joyfulness. Melia uses razor-sharp analysis and strategy to advance the movement and dedicates herself to building new leaders, strengthening relationships, and practicing the politics of love that will sustain our movement over the long haul. I am delighted to present the Emerging Leader Award to Melia Kiernan.
Hello everyone, as Casey said, I'm Barbara Addy and I'm delighted to be on this year's Tribute to Change Planning Committee. Sue Ossoff was working at Women Against Abuse in Philadelphia when she met Juanita. It was 1984, and Juanita was in jail, facing a murder charge for defending herself against her abusive husband. Sue knew that advocates for survivors of domestic violence were working to get police and prosecutors to respond aggressively to abusers and to help protect victims. But once arrested, Juanita was no longer seen as a victim. It was as if her experience of being abused had disappeared completely. Sue was inspired to take action to fight the many injustices battered women like Juanita face once they had been charged with a crime. She recognized the need for advocates to forge new alliances, especially with defense teams. In 1987, Sue co-founded the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women to help victims of domestic violence who are charged with crimes get fair trials with proper legal representation and support. Sue is a tireless proponent of defendants' rights, and she is truly passionate about justice for all, not just a select few. I'm so pleased to present the Trailblazer Award to Sue Ossoff.
Paul Robeson Lifetime Achievement Award goes to the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI. The Paul Robeson Lifetime Achievement Award is given each year to an individual who has made an outstanding contribution to social change recently or throughout his or her lifetime. Bonnie Rains, John Rains, and Keith Forsyth are accepting the award tonight. And now please welcome David Carries to present the award.
In
my pleasure to represent the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI for over 4 decades. Turned out it was a very easy case. They were effective burglars. The FBI was obsessed with somebody else doing it, so they just pursued this other person and his close associates. And so the statute of limitations has run, and they've revealed themselves to no ill effects, which is very nice. It's very fitting to me that Bread and Roses be awarding this particular group of people tonight. Both come out of that progressive activist generation of the 1960s and the 1970s, which I'm happy to say was my generation as well. I mean, we stopped systemic segregation, we stopped systemic discrimination against women, we beat back a lot of cultural conformity, and along the way we stopped the war. So there were activists of all stripes doing amazing things, but I really have to say, imagine among committed people, and there were many of them, breaking into an FBI office in the middle of the night and taking every piece of paper they had in old Samsonite suitcases, walking out on the street, putting them in the trunk of a car and driving away. Is that amazing that they did that? And it had the desired effect. They took this enormous risk beyond really thinking of it. For myself, I never could have done it. But they took this enormous risk, and what did it lead to? We discovered COINTELPRO. We discovered the surveillance and the vicious, dirty tricks, including being involved in murders, that our government was up to. So it had this enormous effect. It led to the first, they're not permanent, they weren't permanent, but the first real limits on government surveillance. There's a terrific book about it called The Burglary, and the burglars will be willing to sign it. They're, by the way, as clients, they're about the nicest bunch of burglars I ever met. But, and there's a film called 1971, a great documentary film made by Johanna Hamilton, and it's in the Philadelphia Independent Film Festival showing the 28th of June, this month, at the National Constitution Center. So it's my honor and pleasure to award the Paul Robeson Award to John Raines, Bonnie Raines, and Keith Forsyth.
You know, what we did not come out of nowhere. We did not, in a vacuum, decide to break into the FBI and steal their documents and send them to the newspapers. The context was the progressive movements of those eras, primarily the civil rights movement, of which Bill and John were both very active, and the anti-war movement, in which we were all active. The first documented protest that I could find against the war in Vietnam was actually in 1945, when the American government shipped French soldiers back to Vietnam at the end of World War II to retake over their colony. And the group of sailors in the American Merchant Marine that were protesting, that were transporting these troops, protested against it. So as early as that, people of conscience were objecting to our taking up arms on behalf of colonialism.
In 1963, the first public mass demonstrations against the war within the United States took place, one in New York City and one in Philadelphia. Probably those Quakers had something to do with it. In 1964, the first draft card was burned, and a massive demonstration of 700 people happened in San Francisco. In 1965, the biggest demonstration was 20,000. In 1967, it was up to 300,000. In 1969, there was a new organization created called the New Mob. For those of you who remember those days, you remember the old Mob and the New Mob? And that demonstration that fall was 500,000 people in Washington, D.C. So this was our neighborhood. You know, this is where we came from. We didn't do this on our own. In terms of whistleblowers, in 1970, there was a former Army intelligence officer by the name of Chris Pyle who went public with the fact that the Army had agents going around the country spying on anti-war protests. You know about Dan Berrigan and, Dan Ellsberg in the Pentagon Papers. In terms of civil disobedience, in 1967, the first draft board raid took place with some people associated with the Berrigans and the so-called Catholic left. And this was the movement that we came out of. This is where we learned our burglary skills. And there are some other people in the room, I won't mention any names, who had some involvement with that movement as well. And during the time of the Vietnam War, over 300 draft boards were broken into in the United States of America. 300. And many of them were people affiliated with the Catholic left. Many of them were just people who did it on their own. There were 2 kids in my hometown of Akron, Ohio, who broke into the draft board there in the middle of the night at the age of 18. And so these actions were happening everywhere. In terms of other acts of civil disobedience, in 1971, the May Day demonstrations in Washington, D.C., which was an attempt at mass civil disobedience in the nation's capital, there were 12,614 arrests on a single day. Still a record in the United States. And I would just like to say those are the officially recorded arrests, because I know Alan Renish and I were arrested twice that day, and we got away both times before they got us to the paddy wagon. So we did not do this in a vacuum. It came from somewhere. We had a community, and many of that community is here today. And without that community, we would not only would not have thought of doing what we did, but we wouldn't have been able to do what we did. And more than that, we wouldn't have been able to get away with it, because there were so many suspects. So on a theme that Dave said, I think about what is it can I really say in all seriousness to this group of people. And one thing I would say with a little bit with a perspective of years is to echo what Dave said. For the most part, we were successful. It took a long time. If you think about it, think about it, that first protest in 1945, the war in Vietnam went on until 1975. 30 years. 30 years. But it did come to an end. And it didn't come to an end because the United States government suddenly got a conscience. It came to an end because people of this country and the people of Vietnam put a stop to it. And in terms of government surveillance and disruption and attacks on protected First Amendment activities, that's been going on since really the early days of the government, but the Palmer raids in 1919, which should have been called the Hoover raids because Palmer just put his name on it, J. Edgar Hoover did all the work, through to the initiation of COINTELPRO against the left, including but not limited to the Communist Party in the 50s, and then the New Left and the Civil Rights Movement. In the Church Committee finally happened in 1975, after COINTELPRO had been going on for over 20 years. The FISA Act, which Dave referred to, that put limits on that activity, was passed in 1978. So it took 7 years after the documents that we revealed came out before the law was changed, but the law was changed. So I would just say, keep it up, you will be successful.
Each year when we give these awards, I am always in awe of the work that our honorees are doing, and this year is certainly no exception. My heart is filled with so much gratitude and appreciation for the work that all of you are doing. So if you're here, can you just please come stand in front of the stage one more time, and please show them some love.
Out to support Bread and Roses tonight. Your participation in building a movement for justice in Philadelphia is essential in these thrilling but challenging times. I have loved and participated in Bread and Roses since it was founded as the People's Fund more than 40 years ago. This year it was exciting to be asked to help choose the honorees and to plan the event. And as we reviewed the potential honorees, I was struck by how rich, diverse, and effective the grassroots movement is in Philadelphia. And I was thrilled. It filled me with energy. All of us can only be a link in a long chain for the struggle for justice. None of us can do it by ourselves. We connect the work of people in generations behind us to the work of people in the generations that will follow us. Just as the work of Bonnie, John, Keith, and their comrades is a direct link to the courage of Edward Snowden. At this moment, we face unprecedented threats from the surveillance state, from corporate greed, from environmental disaster, from efforts to roll back racial and economic justice. But the work of these groups is stellar. Their strategies are strong, and their commitments are deep. In order to support their work, we have to dig deep.
Thank you very much. It truly is my honor and my privilege to be your executive director, and your support, I'm so grateful for it. Thank you. Have a great night.